Okay friends, it's time to get started on our job. One of the first things you want to do is safely raise and support the front of the vehicle so the wheel's off the ground. After that, we're going to go ahead and start removing this center cover. Typically, you're going to have some plastic covers on here. We'll just use a 19mm to remove those. We'll use a plastic trim tool. We can carefully pop this off. Set that aside. Now let's remove all 5 of our 19mm lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that we have that out of the way, let's go ahead and remove this 10mm headed bolt, which holds this bracket for the brake hose. Separate that from the strut. Now let's do the exact same thing on the other side of the strut for the ABS wire. The next thing we're going to do is come right down here to our 34mm axle nut. Go ahead and loosen this up, we'll remove it, and then we're going to go ahead and bonk in the center of this axle to drive it out of the wheel bearing a little bit, essentially just to break it free. Now we'll use a hammer and punch. Once you have that axle moving, let's continue on up here to the mounting point that holds the strut to the knuckle. To start removing both of these bolts, I'm going to use a 21mm wrench on the bolt side. That's going to come straight through here to this 24mm nut. Let's do the same on the bottom. Now let's just use our hammer. We're going to give this a couple loving bonks to drive it out. Okay, now we can carefully separate this, and we're going to set it aside towards the rear. Now up inside the engine compartment, we're going to have to locate the upper strut mount bolts. You can see one right out in the open here. There's another one right there. And then if you move this over to the side, you can find the other 15mm headed bolt. I'm going to start with the hardest to get to, and then on the last one, I'll make sure I'm holding that strut before I fully remove it. Okay, so I'm going to reach under here, grab onto this strut. Let's get this bolt out of here. Give this a little wiggle, break it free from the body of the vehicle, and remove it from the wheel well. Okay friends, now it's time to install our brand new front strut assembly. Now in the box, you might notice that it came with the bolts along the top. Just go ahead and remove those, add some red thread locker. Bring it right in like this. Careful for that fender. Up along the top, we're going to try to line up those bolt holes. Now once you have all 3 of your top mounting bolts started, we're going to pause with this, make our way back into the wheel well, put everything back together under there, put the complete weight of the vehicle down on the ground, and then we can get back up top, snug these up, and torque them to manufacturer's specification. Now before we go ahead and put in our strut bolts, let's go ahead and clean up the threading area and then apply some brand new red thread locker. Once you have that done, let's go ahead and slide this into position. Now we're going to line up our bolt holes, put our bolts through from the front towards the rear. Now at this point, we can go ahead and bottom both of these out. When we torque them, we're going to torque them to 136 foot-pounds. Next, we're going to apply some copper never sees to each of the 2 holes where we had the ABS wire and the brake hose mounting bolts. Now at this point, I have both of my mounting points started in here. I went ahead and I used a through bolt all the way through this, and then I put a nut on the inside. At this point, I can go ahead and snug these up so they're secure to the strut. Let's use some red thread locker on that axle threads. We'll put on our axle nut. Now at this point, we're going to want to bottom out this axle nut by hand. You never want to go ahead and tighten these up with an air gun because you could compress that wheel bearing that's located inside this area and damage it overall. Now at this point, before we go ahead and torque this axle nut, I'm just going to go ahead and take my wheel and I'll put it right up on here. As you can tell, looking through the center, I still have a clear view of that axle nut. So what we can do is go ahead and put on all of our lug nuts, get the wheel back on the ground, and we can torque everything at once. Now with the wheel safely back on the ground, we can go ahead and start torquing this. I'm going to start with the axle nut. For that nut, we're going to torque it to 118 foot-pounds. Now we're going to use our 19mm socket and torque all of our lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds in a crisscross manner. Now we can put on that center cover. Just line up all of your holes with the lug nuts behind it. Give it a little bonk to put it on there. Make sure it's secure. We also have these little covers. Go ahead and screw those on as well. Now with the complete weight of the vehicle back down on the ground, we're going to go ahead and snug all three of these, and then when we torque them, we're going to torque them to 35 foot-pounds. Now just make sure this rubber is completely situated where it needs to be. Okay friends, we got one side strut in there. What's left to do now? Now you're going to want to make sure that you do the exact same thing on the other side of the vehicle. It only makes sense to make sure you do these struts as a pair. Aside from that, take it safely for a road test down to your local alignment shop. Thanks for watching.